We talk a lot about social acceptance, but what does that actually look like in the real world? Today, we're going to dig into a topic that really highlights the gap between the words we use and the way we actually behave.
I mean, this is the story we tell ourselves, right? That we're a lot more accepting now, that sexuality is more fluid and understood. It's become the official narrative of progress. And hey, on the surface, there's definitely some truth to it. The public conversation has for sure evolved.
But what happens when you look past the big public statements and into the small, everyday interactions? Well, for bisexual men, the gap between what society says it believes and how it actually behaves can feel like a massive canyon. And that's exactly where we're going to start.
Okay, so our first section gets into this idea of a dangerous category. But let's be super clear here. The source material isn't arguing that bisexuality itself is dangerous. Not at all. The danger comes from how society reacts to it.
So that's the absolute key. The issue isn't the identity, it's the reaction. It's the suspicion, the constant questioning, all the stereotypes that get projected onto bisexual men. This harm comes from the outside. And it's tricky, because it often hides behind some very respectable-sounding language.
And this brings us to a really critical concept: polite stigma. This is basically when prejudice gets a makeover. It's laundered through these socially acceptable terms. So someone might say, oh, it's just my preference, or I'm just worried about safety, when what's really driving the bus is a deep-seated cultural bias.
And man, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? The pushback isn't framed as obvious bigotry. It's disguised as just being reasonable or cautious. But as the source puts it, it's really just stigma that's learned how to put on a suit and tie and speak politely. So let's move on, because this pressure doesn't just come from one direction. That's what makes it so tough. For bisexual men, it can often feel like being trapped in a social no man's land, where they're facing disbelief from multiple communities all at once.
And just look at how this breaks down. It's a total catch-22. From straight culture, you get the he's secretly gay narrative. But then, from within gay culture, the perception can be he's not really queer enough, or he's just indecisive. And then in the dating world, he's often painted as inherently risky or unable to commit, based purely on stereotypes, not on who he is as a person.
This slide illustrates such a critical difference. See, it's one thing to face prejudice. That's hostility toward a group that people at least acknowledge exists. But it's another thing entirely to face identity invalidation. That's when people deny that your category is even real in the first place. They try to explain you away as just confused, or in a phase, or flat out lying. And that right there is the core of this psychological weight. Having your very existence constantly questioned isn't just hurtful, it is profoundly destabilizing. It forces you into a position of having to constantly defend your own reality.
Okay, so we've seen what's happening, but why? Why this specific, intense reaction to male bisexuality? Well, the source material argues it's all tied to something much bigger and much deeper: the way we police masculinity itself.
So that's the real question, isn't it? What is actually being threatened here? Because it's clearly not just about who someone is attracted to, it's about what that attraction represents within our whole social structure.
And here is the central theory: status collapse. It's this unspoken cultural anxiety that if a man can be the object of desire for other men, he somehow loses his place in the masculine hierarchy. He risks this social demotion, a fall from grace where he could be treated like a woman.
So what it really boils down to is that male bisexuality throws a wrench into a system that relies on really rigid, predictable rules. It proves that desire doesn't have to fit into these neat little boxes, and that very idea, that ambiguity, is seen as a fundamental threat to the social order. And in response, society has this sort of predictable playbook to try and restore that order. It's like a preemptive punishment. It starts with denial, he's just confused. Then it moves to ridicule, oh, just pick a side already. That often escalates to erasure. You know what, he's just gay and he's lying. And finally, it can blow up into a full-on moral panic, where he's just labeled as untrustworthy or unsafe by his very nature.
Now, this is not just a theoretical chat. This social architecture, this whole system, has a very real, very tangible, and very human cost. So let's take a look at the actual consequences of living under this kind of pressure. When you see it laid out like this, it's pretty stark. The elevated rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide risk are not because bisexual men are somehow inherently fragile. The source makes it clear. It's because living with chronic social instability is just corrosive. It wears down your mind and your spirit.
and the impacts just ripple out from there. You see higher rates of substance use, a lower likelihood of being out to friends, family, or even doctors, which of course means less access to support. You can only imagine the constant exhaustion of having to manage and defend who you are, leading to this profound loneliness, this feeling of being socially homeless.
Now, it's easy to assume that if men hide their identity, it must come from a place of shame or weakness. But the source material challenges that idea head-on.
So if it's not weakness, then what is it? Why choose to be invisible?
And this is the powerful, unavoidable conclusion. In a social environment that punishes your truth with suspicion, ridicule, and erasure, hiding is no longer an act of cowardice. It becomes a rational act of self-preservation. It's simply survival.
So what do we take away from all this? Well, it leaves us with a really challenging question to chew on. If our acceptance is conditional, if it only really applies to people who fit neatly into our pre-existing boxes, is that truly acceptance at all? Thanks for watching.